So what do we even mean when we talk about capital L literature or literary fiction? I feel like a lot of people have a perception of literary fiction as if it's something really boring or something that you only read for school. And I feel like the readers that I come across who really want to escape into the books that they're reading don't really see the value of literary fiction because it's just too similar to our world. Now, I'm of the mind that literary fiction actually encompasses more than just like contemporary lit or historical lit or even classics. And in today's video, I'm going to tell you about 16 literary fiction books that I personally love and that I found either because of booktok or because of someone else's very strange taste. I feel like all of these books are very interesting and gripping and will be the kind of literary fiction that you will learn to love. Literary fiction is often described as being more character driven than genre fiction, which is often driven by the plot and a certain plot structure that works for that genre. In the case of a romance, there's a build up until the couple gets together, there is a denouement, there's usually a third act breakup, and then of course we always have a happily ever after. In a thriller, we have some sort of mystery that needs to be solved, and by the end of the book it usually does get solved or people get murdered. And then in a lot of fantasy and sci-fi we get something called the hero's journey, which is essentially a main protagonist who goes through a kind of cycle that takes them to the end of the book and often involves them going through the ringer and going through a lot of trials and tribulations before they can defeat the enemy. However, with literary fiction it's more character driven, as I said, and oftentimes the plot is actually fairly unpredictable. Literary fiction doesn't necessarily follow a formula for the plot narrative. And I think that is one of the reasons why it can be kind of unsettling for genre fiction readers who are not used to that level of uncertainty. Genre fiction can be so comforting because it follows a certain structure. A lot of romance readers read romance because it is comforting. You know that there's going to be a happily ever after at the end. And I want to make the caveat that genre fiction isn't any less than literary fiction just because it follows a certain formula. I often find that genre fiction can actually explore some really interesting themes because it has a set structure, and so you can explore those in a very interesting way. Now, beyond that very obvious difference between literary fiction and genre fiction, there's also this perception that literary fiction has more artistic merit, that literary fiction focuses more on the quality of the writing and the style and the exploration of profound themes. This is perhaps my one issue with the way that people talk about literary fiction, because I do feel that genre fiction has just as much ability to explore profound themes, to have high quality writing, and do it in a very interesting and impeccable style. And that is why for today's video, I'm going to be recommending you 16 literary fiction books that I personally love and that I think are fairly accessible for any type of reader and that I think are exciting and interesting and the type of book that you're really going to cherish later on. But also, some of the books in this list are actually genre fiction books technically, but are ones that I personally find have some element that makes them feel more like a literary fiction. So that might be more of a focus on the characters, or a less plot-driven story, or a story that doesn't seem to follow any sort of formula or really break some regular conventions of the genre. Alright, so the first book that I want to talk about today is actually one that comes out next year in 2025. It comes out August 5th. And the reason I want to talk about it is because I absolutely adore this book. I read it early because I am publishing this book under my publishing imprint, Boundless Press. I realize I haven't even introduced myself for this video yet, but if you're new here, I'm Jananie. This is my channel, The Story Ain't Over. And about a year ago, I partnered up with a startup called Bindery, which is basically Patreon plus publishing. On Bindery, I have a Patreon-esque exclusive community. People join and subscribe, and for the price of a coffee, they get exclusive extra content from me, and they also get the behind the scenes on the publishing process with my imprint, Boundless Press. So the first literary fiction that I wanted to recommend is Dust Settles North by Deena ElGenaidi. The poster of the cover is right there, but here's the cover again for all of you. We recently revealed it, and I think it's so gorgeous. But Dust Settles North is officially the first ever book that my imprint, Boundless Press, will be publishing. It's coming out August 2025, and the book is by a lovely Egyptian-American author named Deena ElGenaidi, and the book follows these two siblings who are reeling from their mother's death and who are dealing with their grief in very different ways. Hannah is in Egypt dealing with her grief and trying to understand more about her mother, and then her brother Zayn goes back to America after their mother's funeral in Egypt and starts to find his life falling apart. Dust Settles North explores so many beautiful and profound themes, and I think the thing that I love the most about it and the thing that made me want to publish it is the fact that it deals with this idea and this theme of living between two different cultures and not knowing who you are and struggling with your sense of self even into adulthood. Our two main characters are dealing with their Egyptian-American identity and how both their parents sort of fit into the conception of their identity. So if you're interested in Dust Settles North, I would highly recommend checking out my Bindery community. You can become a member for the price of a coffee, or you can join as a free follower and get some regular updates. But if you do join as a paid member, you'll get the full behind the scenes of the publishing process with Dust Settles North and any other books that we publish under my imprint. And that includes like early excerpts. You'll get to see like the entire entire process. I recently posted the editorial letter that the author received, and that went into the things that, you know, she could improve on for the book. And Deena will also be doing a guest post in the next couple of weeks where she breaks down how she tackled her edits. But even beyond joining my bindery community, I think a lot of you are really gonna love Dust Settles North, so I would highly recommend, if you're able to, go pre-order it at the links down below. Pre-orders really help with the life of a book and helps retailers and booksellers know that people are excited about a book, which will then get them to stock more of it in their bookstores and things like that. And if pre-ordering isn't possible for you right now, you can also just go and add it on your Goodreads, or you can go add it on Fable. So Fable is actually sponsoring today's video. Thank you so much, Fable. But the second literary fiction book that I wanted to recommend to you today is actually the October book club pick for my book club, the Boundless Book Club, on Fable. And that book is Enter Ghost by Isabella Hamad. I'm still currently in the middle of reading this one because I'm reading it with my book club, but I am loving it so much, and it's so well written and really beautifully character driven. I've actually read one of Isabella Hamad's other books. It's called Recognizing the Stranger, and it's actually a speech that she gave about a year ago that touches upon Palestine and narrative, and that was beautifully written. I'm absolutely obsessed with it. But Enter Ghost is equally beautifully written. In this book, we follow Sonia, who is an actress. She usually does theater, and she's been away from Palestine for many years, but when we open on the book, she's actually returning to Palestine to visit her sister Haneen, who lives in Haifa. Now, Sonia is reeling from a disastrous love affair back in England, but she finds herself getting roped into a West Bank production of Hamlet. She finds herself playing Gertrude, who is Hamlet's mother in the play, and as opening night gets closer and closer, she starts to see all of the violent obstacles in their way. I'm honestly really loving this, and I hope that you can go join my book club down below on Fable and read the book with me. And even if you're coming to this video a bit later, you can also still join and read the next month's book. Now, beyond just hosting my book club on Fable, which is absolutely fantastic, you can download the app for free, and using the link in my description, you can join my book club and discuss the monthly pick with over 3,000 other members and me. As a member of the book club, you also get to choose which books we read. I usually put up a poll of like 3 or 4 books that I'm thinking of for the month, and from there the members of the book club can vote on which one they want to read next. I've been using Fable for a while now, and recently they've been putting out some really amazing features that I am just absolutely in love with. They are a really amazing alternative to Goodreads. I know there's a lot of us out there that absolutely hate the Goodreads interface. We absolutely hate the fact that it's owned by Amazon, and honestly I just hate the fact that you can't put like half stars or quarter stars as ratings. Everything is just so cut and dry and doesn't allow for the level of nuance that I want to put into my reviews. However, about a month or 2 ago, I actually decided to make the big leap and import all of my Goodreads data into Fable so that I could use it as my new book tracking app. It's literally easy as 1, 2, 3. You go to your profile and then you hit settings, and then in your settings there's a section called your data, and there you'll find a button where you can import your Goodreads data. And from there, Fable just digests all of that information and distills it into your different shelves, your want to read, your read, you're currently reading, and it also imports all of your star ratings and reviews. Now, beyond the really easy switch over from Goodreads, the thing I really love the most about Fable is their beautiful stats page. This is, I swear, the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and it just makes me so happy every time I open my phone and look at it. You'll get a cute little summary of your reading. So my current summary says I'm a dark academia dreamer. Like, what? I just love this. It's just so fun and so personal and so much cooler than Goodreads could ever aspire to be. But beyond the summary aspect, we also get a summary of our average rating. So mine is 4.8 because I actually don't rate that many books, because when I used to use Goodreads, I didn't like to put my star ratings. But now that I'm on Fable, I am going through my old list of books and I'm actually trying to add ratings, because Fable lets you do quarter ratings and half star ratings, and it's just so much more flexible than Goodreads could ever be. Now, my stats summary also shows my 2024 goal. So my goal is 52 books for the entire year. I've actually just surpassed that. I'm at 53 books for the entire year. And then a really cool new feature that was added is that you can track your reading streaks. So essentially each day you can log what book you've read for any amount of time that day, and you can also change like how far you've gotten into the book. And from there, Fable tracks the days that you've been reading, and you can create your own reading streak. For those of us who have ever used Duolingo and know how important a streak is, the second this feature came out, I was like, I need to be on this. I need to have a high streak and I need to not break it. I also just love Fable for the community aspect. If you go to your homepage, you can scroll through other people's posts and see other clubs and post your own thoughts and ask for recommendations. And I think it's just a really nice way to make reading a more social experience when it's often just a very solitary one. So I highly recommend checking out Fable. If you're not going to download it for free to join my book club at least, you should at least download it to track your reading and get a much better experience than Goodreads. Let's talk about the next book that I wanted to recommend. So I have You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat. This is one that I actually did find on BookTok, and it is one that I think is also very similar to Dust Settles North. It's also by an Arab author, it's by a Palestinian American author, and similar to Dust Settles North, our main character is an adult for most of the book, and she is still trying to figure herself out. The book is told in vignettes where we follow our main character from the United States into the Middle East, from New York to Lebanon to Palestine to Jordan, and we follow her from when she's a teen as she becomes this sought-after DJ and as she becomes an aspiring writer. But amidst all this, we also see her various romantic relationships, and we see her struggle with her mental health. And like we said about literary fiction, you know, they don't really follow a certain formula or plot. This book is definitely that. I feel like although there are things that happen, it feels a little plotless because we are following our main character as she sort of meanders through life and tries to figure herself out. I think what was so stunning about this book was the queer representation in it and the way that the main character is dealing with her mother's sort of view of her and her mother's sort of judgment of her. Her mother says at the very beginning of the book, "You exist too much," when the main character comes out to her as queer. And so through this book, we see this young woman deal with her different cultural, religious, and sexual identities. All right, next I have Women Eating by Claire Coda, and this one is definitely one of those books that is technically a genre fiction book, but personally I think the tone and style of the book feels much more like a literary fiction, and the way that it's plotted and just the overall vibe. We basically follow our main character, who is this young mixed-race vampire. She is British, she's Japanese, and she's also Malaysian. But when we open up on the book, she has left her mother's side and is trying to fend for life on her own. She finds herself falling in love and trying to figure out the whole logistics of trying to get blood. And one of the very cool themes that runs throughout the book is the idea of hunger, but also how food can be a connection to your heritage and to the people that you love. Our main character can't actually have solid food, she can only have blood, but she finds herself watching all of these like mukbang videos and like what I ate in a week videos on YouTube and like online to see what people are eating and sort of feast with her eyes. It's one of the most original vampire books I've ever read, so I highly recommend. On a very similar note, I have The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I know that a lot of you will say, oh no, but that's like a sci-fi fantasy. No, I want to make the argument that this is actually a literary fiction. Although it does have this sort of fantasy dystopian-esque setting, and it does involve some magical-ish powers, this book is written and structured in such a beautiful way that makes it feel so much more like a literary fiction to me. I personally don't think it fits the regular sci-fi fantasy formula for the plot, and generally the plot isn't actually what drives this book forward, it is the characters themselves, and as you follow them and you want to understand them as people, and you start to root for them to come out alive by the end. Not only that, I think the themes that N.K. Jemisin explores in this book are just really profound, and to me seem a step above a lot of other fantasies that I've read that are mainly escapist. Okay, next I have Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. This one somehow feels like some sort of slight fantasy book, but it really isn't. I think it's just the way that it's written. It's just so beautiful, but also somehow like ethereal, but there's really actually no fantasy to this book. Essentially, this book follows two very eccentric main characters, and we are watching them fall in love. But this isn't necessarily a romance, I would say, and it really does mainly deal with the mental state of the two characters. Both of them have dealt with different mental health struggles, and one of the main characters, Reagan, actually has a mood disorder. It is implied that it's bipolar disorder, and I feel like that representation was done so well as someone with bipolar disorder. So this one is definitely one of my favorite books because it covers that representation in a really interesting and beautifully written way. And honestly, if you read this one and you weren't totally gagged by all of the quotes in this one, then I don't know what to tell you. Okay, this next one is a more traditional literary fiction, but it definitely leans more into the satire realm, which is probably one of my favorite types of literary fiction. So that book is Disorientation by Elaine Seychaux. This book is honestly so underrated. I do not hear enough people talking about it, but I did originally discover it on BookTok and I was just so intrigued. This book is written by an Asian American author, and it is essentially a campus novel satire with a bit of a whodunit mystery and a bit of Yellowface. If you read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang and you were expecting it to be a little bit more on the literary end, then I would highly recommend picking up Disorientation. Although it doesn't deal with publishing and it deals with academia instead, it does hit a lot of the same notes, but in a more nuanced and expansive way, in my opinion. Okay, Big Swiss by Jen Began. This one was definitely one that I picked up because of BookTok. I swear I saw it everywhere, and I just became obsessed with wanting to know what it was about. I highly recommend listening to the audiobook for this one because it is fantastically narrated. exaggerated, and I do believe it has multiple narrators, and it follows this middle-aged woman named Greta who has recently like totally flipped her life upside down, and she has gotten this job as a transcriber for a sex therapist. Our main character basically transcribes sessions with this sex therapist with his patients, and as Greta listens to these therapy sessions to try to transcribe them, she starts to fall in love with one of the patients. Now this would be fine if she wasn't actually meeting this person in real life, and she starts to fall for her in real life and starts to use the stuff that she knows from the therapy sessions to make this woman, who Greta has lovingly named Big Swiss, to fall in love with her. As I said, this book is a satire, so there's a lot of like kooky and crazy and exaggerated elements to the story to really drive the point home. But I think what was so great about this book was that it was so original, and I loved Greta as a main character because she was so chaotic, but she's also obviously a main character who is struggling deeply with her mental health and potentially with a mental illness. I feel like this book had not only like kind of depression representation, but also maybe even bipolar representation, though it's not really named. So I really loved it for that reason as well. All right, on a completely different note, I have Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. This one definitely leans into the historical side of literary fiction, and it essentially follows 4 generations of this one family. And it starts in 1900 with the teenage Sanja, who finds herself getting embroiled with this very wealthy, powerful man and accidentally getting pregnant. From there, she makes the decision to marry a different man and leaves Korea to go to Japan. And this is during the time of like Japan's occupation of Korea, and where we see a lot of Koreans become second-class citizens in Japan. And so essentially we are following that sort of like segment of society through Sanja's family and her descendants. This book really delves into the topic of generational trauma, and I think it does it in such a beautiful, stunning, and also like heartbreaking way. You cannot walk away from this book without crying, and it's definitely one of those books that I wish I could read again for the first time. All right, speaking of generational trauma, the next book that I have is A Woman Is No Man by Ataf Rum. This book is by a Palestinian-American author, and it follows 3 generations of women in this one family. It starts in 1990 in Palestine, and we follow Isra as she is getting her marriage arranged to this other man. And with this marriage, she is taken off to America with her husband, and she is forced to fit in with her husband's family and is sort of plagued by her mother-in-law, Farida, who is actually one of the other main characters and POV characters as well. Now, the 3rd generation that we get is actually Isra's daughter, Dea, who we are meeting when she's around, I think 16 or 18 at the beginning of the book, and she is also seeing her life get controlled by Farida. And in the Dea timeline, we actually don't know where Isra is or where her husband is. We don't know what happened to Dea's parents. And so the story goes forward, and we get these 3 different perspectives throughout the book, and we kind of switch different timelines, and we're slowly starting to put together the pieces of what happened to Isra and her husband. What I loved about this book was, again, like this examination of generational trauma, but also just how it works through the women of the family, and also how nuanced the situation is. Even Farida, who seems like the antagonist for most of the book, you start to understand the reasons for why she is the way she is, and I think it adds like a very interesting and layered and complex element to the book. All right, next up we have one of my favorite books ever. It's a recent favorite of mine from this year, and that is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Mosfeg. I was seeing this book all over BookTok for 80 years, and I never thought to pick it up until this year, and I'm so glad I did, because this is exactly the type of book that I love. It is a plotless book with a mentally ill main character who is just going through it and making absolutely terrible and awful decisions. Essentially, we follow our main character, who is a recent Columbia graduate, and she is this sort of like wealthy white girl who has lost her parents, but she still comes from a very strong level of privilege. But somehow this character is so severely depressed that she decides she's going to sleep away an entire year of her life with the hopes that she will wake up and be transformed. And so with the help of this very kooky psychiatrist who literally prescribes her everything under the sun, our main character embarks on the journey of her year of rest and relaxation. Again, this book is super weird and absolutely absurd and definitely doesn't make sense half the time. And I think going into it, you just need to know that it is a satire, and then that way you will enjoy yourself immensely. Okay, next I have Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Malors. This was one of my favorite books of last year, and I was absolutely stunned by how beautiful the writing was, one, but also how this one starts off as if it's a romance, but it's really just a character study of multiple different characters who all revolve around these 2 main characters, Cleo and Frank. We follow these characters over a year of their lives, and we see them go through so many different trials and tribulations, but mainly related to into their mental states. This book has one of the most amazing representations of 1, depression, and 2, alcohol addiction. I feel like the way that the author wrote these characters was just so interesting and intriguing, and it honestly just felt so realistic to me. And although these characters aren't meant to be likable in any way, you get so invested in their stories, and you want to see where their messiness is going to take them next. Alright, speaking of messy characters, the next book that I have is I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. This book is a very short and punchy novel that follows a main character who remains unnamed throughout the book, but she's essentially a fan. She becomes obsessed with the woman who is sleeping with the guy that she was also having an affair with. And this woman that she's obsessed with is like a influencer or is online in some way, and our main character finds herself sort of online stalking her and getting so obsessed with her and the man that she used to be with, and just their lives in general from a very like parasocial third person perspective. It's honestly such a quick read and has so many hot takes, and it's just hilarious as well because again, it's like a satire. And I think if you pick up this one, you'll definitely think about the internet and just like the idea of being chronically online in a very different way. All right, next I have a translated fiction from Japanese, and that is Breasts and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami. And I have to tell you that this book was so stunning that Mieko Kawakami became one of my new favorite authors. This book is essentially told in like 2 parts. The first part follows our main character as she is visited by her sister, who also has a daughter, and we follow these 3 women over a few days, and we are seeing them deal with the different aspects of being a woman in society. Our main character is sort of reclusive and hasn't really had any relationships, whereas her sister is coming to town so that she can get breast implants to make her breasts bigger, and while her daughter is getting obsessed with the concept of just getting older and going through puberty and being in this weird stage of adolescence. This book talks about like breasts, about eggs, about puberty, about periods, and it also starts to delve into the concept of being a mother and giving birth and just the rights that we have related to having children. Although we have this first part, the second part of the book actually focuses a lot more on the main character herself and a specific journey that she's going through because she wants to have a child but isn't in a relationship, and she starts to explore the concept of a sperm donor. But there's a lot of obstacles and issues to do with sperm donation as well, and as you read, you'll just be like, weirded out but also astounded as you go. And I think what I love about Mieko Kawakami's writing in this book specifically is just the way that she has characters sort of say these very long and lengthy speeches and their hot takes on life and just the meaning of it, and it's just so beautifully written, and it really just makes you think and wonder in such a profound way that I found absolutely stunning. Okay, next I have Severance by Ling Ma, and this one definitely fits into the category of books that are actually technically genre fiction but really just feel like literary fictions. And this book was released prior to COVID because, as you'll hear the description, you'll find that it's very similar. But essentially our main character lives in New York, I think, and she works for a packaging company that creates these new editions of Bibles. And our main character sort of hates her life and doesn't know what to do and has a lot of this like millennial angst. But what gets weird about this book is that we start to see this insane virus start to go around the whole globe, and we see a whole pandemic. It's not COVID because this book was written before COVID. This pandemic and this virus starts to turn people into zombies. One where we see the main character prior to this virus spreading and prior to her life absolutely changing, and then the other after this virus has like taken over the world and she is sort of like surviving with other people around her who've managed not to be killed or turned into zombies, and she is sort of seeing humanity collapse before her eyes in this very sort of dystopian-esque way. But the way the book is written just feels so much like a literary fiction, and the plot kind of meanders in weird ways, and we're really focused on the main character's own emotional and psychological state throughout the book. All right, and then the final book that I want to recommend to you today is probably an obvious one, but it is the least obvious of this author's books that have been recommended, and that book is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I'm one of the few people on the planet who really did not love Normal People at all and who didn't like Beautiful World, Where Are You? But Conversations with Friends was my Sally Rooney book. I have yet to read Intermezzo. It's on my list, and I'm hoping I'll like it as much as this one. But this book I honestly think is such a stunning literary fiction, and it deals with a main character who's going through a lot of emotional ups and downs and finds herself in an affair with an older man. However, what I think makes this book different from other affair-related literary fictions and sort of boring ones that I always grew up thinking that I would hate is the fact that this book has a queer element to it. The main character is bisexual, and her best friend Bobby is someone who she has previously had a bit of a relationship with. Like, they weren't always platonic, and I think the repressed level of her affection towards Bobby and how that manifests in the book was also just so interesting and added a different layer to this book that I did not expect. So if you're looking for a really stunningly written literary fiction with a little bit of humor, with some complicated feelings and some queer representation, and also just a chaotic main character who doesn't know what she's doing, this is the book to be picking up. Alrighty, and with that said, those are all the books that I wanted to recommend today. I feel like all of these books are just so fantastic and definitely ones that you can pick up to get yourself into literary fiction. If you asked me years ago, I probably would have said that I hated literary fiction, but it's so interesting to see now how much I love this genre and how I'm so obsessed with like the different facets of the genre. I really think literary fiction can encompass so many different things, and I think the way that it examines different themes and follows characters who are utterly complex and just so interesting, I think that is the real draw. Anyways, that's my spiel for literary fiction. I hope you will find a book that you can enjoy from this list. And like I said at the beginning of this video, if you would be so kind as to pre-order a copy of Dust Settles North, the book that I'm publishing with my imprint, then I would absolutely adore you to death. And even if you can't pre-order it, I would love it if you can add it to Goodreads, add it to Fable, add it to Storygraph, or request it from your library or your local indie. And as always, thank you so much to my Bindery members for supporting me and my channel and making all of this possible. You guys are the real ones. And for those of you who are interested in some extra exclusive content and getting the behind the scenes on the publishing process with Dust Settles North and with my imprint Boundless Press, go join below for the price of a coffee to get all of that exclusive content. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video, and please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!